Why do floors in a house sink or slope? As a licensed structural engineer, I'm asked this question all the time by home buyers and by homeowners. It's actually very important to understand the root cause of the issue, and there can be various different causes, but it's important to get to the bottom of it because if you leave the underlying issue unaddressed, it could lead to severe property damage, very expensive to fix, or potentially even hurt someone. Today, I'm going to give you three different possibilities, though there's many more. Before I do that, though, I just want to explain what a structure is. If you think of a building similar to a human body, the structure of a building is like the skeleton. It's what everything else hangs off of. It's what provides stability. The purpose of a structure inside of a house, and I'm talking about the foundations and the framing, the beams, the joists, the rafters, its job really is to not move. That's like its number one job because everything else is depending on it being there so that everything can be stable. And if you see a sloping floor, that means the structure hasn't really done its job because now it's moved. And so that indicates there's some problem with the structure. It might not be severe or it could be very severe. The first example of problems that I see is that the main bearing line of the house is built over a beam and column system, and the columns in the basement are just set to bear right on the concrete floor. The problem with that is that columns actually carry a lot of weight and they exert a lot of force onto the floor over a very small area, so a ton of pressure right there on the floor. And a concrete floor is typically not built to withstand that. And so it cracks and it starts to sink and settle and bring the rest of the house with it. The second issue that you could have is with the framing itself, with the beams and the joists that are in the floor system. They could be fractured, potentially because they were undersized to begin with. It could be that the contractor who built it was trying to save money or reduce the head height so it's more comfortable in that basement. Usually you don't have very much head height in a basement. But another very common culprit is plumbing penetrations. When plumbers install, especially toilet lines, these are very thick pipes that they're installing, and they want to hide it within the floor system, and they'll just cut huge chunks out of the joists or the beams to put their pipes through. And almost every house I look at has these plumbing penetrations that violate code standards for what's allowed to be put into those. And it causes a severe weakness there in the joist of the beam, and it can cause that to crack. And this is actually a very dangerous one because it can cause the entire floor to fail and collapse potentially. But there will often be warning signs in advance where you'll see the floor sloping down towards where that penetration is. And so it gives you some time to recognize that you have a problem and fix it. The third issue is settlement. And this word settlement often gets thrown around a lot by lay people because you just imagine you walk in a house, you see, oh, the floor's it's going down. It has settled. It makes sense to use that word. But as an engineer, when I talk about settlement, what I'm really talking about is the soil under the exterior foundation walls of the house, at the perimeter of the house. That's where most of the weight of the house comes down, and that goes onto the foundation wall, which then goes onto the soil. And if that soil, for whatever reason, becomes soft, then the foundation will just sink into the soil. Not very much, maybe half an inch, maybe an inch. And one thing to keep in mind here too is that it is actually very normal for old houses to sink a little bit in the first couple of years of their life after they're built. But if your house is still sinking after 5, 10 years or longer, if there still is ongoing movement, then that's a problem. One of the things that can cause that problem is if there's improper drainage, if there's a downspout that just unloads all of its discharge right next to a foundation, or perhaps sometimes, often I see where there's just no gutter at all. And so the roof is just draining right there onto the foundation. And that water is just slowly eroding the soil under the foundation. And so that can cause the house to sink in that direction. Now, how do we tell the difference between these three? There's a lot of things that we as engineers can do to figure out what the root cause is. One of the main things to keep in mind is the floor sloping to or away from the exterior walls? Because if it's sloping down to the exterior wall, that suggests that the foundation wall has gone down or potentially still is going down. But if the exterior wall is kind of the high point, then it could be that you have some of those other issues I talked about, problems with the framing or a cracked slab in the basement. And of course, there can be other issues as well. I've only given three examples here. So what I would say is that if you are worried about a sloping floor in your house, that you should call a licensed structural engineer to come out and identify what the root cause is. What you don't want to do is have a contractor just come out and fix what they think the problem is without really getting down to the bottom of it, because they may be fixing something that isn't even the real problem. And that can set you back time and money and potentially even make the situation worse. Now, if you're interested in this kind of educational material, I would encourage you to follow me on YouTube. I'm going to be posting a lot of these type of videos. So I hope to see you there.